Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. In this session of Writers Group Therapy, we are talking with Brett Wagner, the writer and director of The Big Bend, a thriller born from an experience he had with his own family in the deep desert of West Texas. His award-winning shorts Chief and Care appeared at Sundance, the LA International Short Film Festival, and received a BAFTA Award of Excellence, and both qualified for the Academy Awards. Brett serves as the Associate Chair of Film and Television at Savannah College of Art and Design and has an MFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. Welcome to the show, Brett.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being here. A fellow Clevelander, I have to plug here. So from nearby my hometown. So welcome. It's so glad to have you here.
I was going to say I made my first feature film in Cleveland.
You did.
You'll have to check that out.
Yeah. I'll ask about that later because I want to talk about how. Well, actually, let's start there. So you started filmmaking in Cleveland. How did you get into writing and producing? What was your impetus to make that first film?
I have been writing movies since I was a kid. When I was a child, it was always spoofs of James Bond or Star Trek or things like that, where I would gather up my friends and try to make something, usually on Super 8 or VHS. And years later, went to film school and began pursuing it seriously as a career. My thesis from NYU was a feature film called 5 Years, which we shot in Cleveland, Ohio. I came back to Cleveland to do it. We shot out in Oberlin for the rural scenes, and then Tremont area in downtown Cleveland for the more urban scenes. And since then, I've just been on a journey of making movies and TV commercials all over the country, as far afield as Hawaii and LA and New York, and now I live in Savannah, Georgia.
So you really bounced around. So what is it like being a filmmaker in Savannah, Georgia versus like being in LA? Have you actually lived in LA at all? Did you do the LA thing?
Yeah, I lived in LA for 7 years, New York for 10 years. Savannah, I came down here to teach. I'm the associate chair of the film department here at SCAD. And it's been great, honestly. It's a little bit of an easier place to live. It's a little bit of a more affordable place to live, but it is a very popular film destination, and it's beautiful and inspiring as a location. You know, it's very versatile, and it's got a lot of the sort of rural texture as well as a sort of gorgeous historical downtown that kind of inspires storytelling, I think. The truth is, though, that I haven't actually made a movie in Savannah yet. I was living in Savannah when we made The Big Bend, but it was already in development. And as you know from seeing it, it has to take place in West Texas. And so I was leaving here to go off and make a movie down there.
Yeah, I've heard that about Savannah, how pretty it is there. It's on my list of places to visit at some point. And actually, Texas, that makes perfect sense. When I watched the opening scene of The Big Bend, it took me like a little flashback back to my cross-country drive when I moved to LA in 2012. That big sky, you know, just open plains and stuff. That was a really great emotional visual, you know, because I had the memory of that. But it sets that scene for, you know, your story. So about your story, the description of the story talks about how this is a very personal film because it was based on an experience you had with your own family. And I just wanted to clarify, it's not based on a real experience, or is it just inspired by, because without being spoilerly, you're still here.
Yeah, well, yes. So an old friend of mine, Aaron Brown, is the producer of the movie. And he and I met when we both lived in New York. he eventually went back to Texas, and I actually moved out to Hawaii and worked out there for many years. And our families hadn't seen each other in a long time, so we got together for a reunion, a little vacation out in West Texas. And that's where the seeds of this story began. Certainly, the worst and most dramatic elements of the story are fictional, but many of the more bizarre, small, kind of cosmic and strange things that happen in the story really did happen to us. And
Hmm.
without getting into spoilers, and I don't know to what extent we want to avoid spoilers, but um, some of the things that I wrote about wound up happening after I had written it, which was sort of alarming in a life imitating art sort of way. But art also imitated life a lot with the water heater, the toad, things that I can say to you that you'll know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
won't give away things. A lot of that to on a smaller scale really did happen, and that's when Aaron and I started talking about the fact that we just had to make a movie. It's such an incredible, arresting landscape everywhere you look. Makes you want to point a camera at it, and specifically in CinemaScope. We shot the widest angle that we possibly could. It's actually even wider than standard scope, um,
Mm.
and just capturing that landscape, but capturing a very human, personal sort of drama in the foreground of that landscape is really what we set out to do.
So when you wrote this, did you what was your writing process like? How did was it a series of events that you kind of chained together and then built the larger story around, or
This is another project that I feel started with a location, um, as
hmm.
as so much of the writing I do seems to. I will see a place or specific details of a place that get me interested, and I start imagining scenes that might occur in that location. And for the first couple of months, it's usually just scribbling down notes whenever whenever something new pops into my head, an image or a line of dialogue or a detail, and there's just a point, and it sometimes it's just a matter of weeks, and sometimes it's years, where I feel like there's enough of a critical mass of ideas that I
Hmm,
want
yeah.
to structure it into a story. And this one was relatively fast. This one was happening fast and furiously while we were there. And then when I came home, at the time, I still lived in LA when I was writing this, came home and just started looking back on the photos and the videos that we'd shot and the things that had happened. And a story started taking shape. And then, I would say wrote a first draft of it in a couple of months.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. And since you wrote and directed it, do you consider yourself a writer first, a director first? Obviously, you wear both hats, but which one would you consider yourself more in
I,
that
I
camp?
guess I have to say I'm a writer first because I have, at least in the film world, exclusively directed things that I've written. In the
Yeah.
commercial world, where I have mostly made my living over the years directing TV spots, then I find myself directing scripts that come to me um, from other writers, from an advertising agency, typically. Sometimes I'm also the writer of a TV spot, but that's where I've done the director's work of looking at a script, trying to understand what the intentions were, finding the crucial moments, the crucial beats, the things that deserve shots of their own, the places where there are problems, where I want to go back and work with the writer. All of that process of breaking down a script. When you're the writer director, I think you're doing that as you write, and you're putting some of that on the page, and uh, that work is half done by the time you've got a screenplay. So I guess with that in mind, uh, I'm a writer slash director rather than a director and sometimes writer.
Or we could say a director-friendly writer. It was funny. I was just going to ask you that process-wise, since you know you're filming your own stuff. Obviously, you're already thinking in terms of like shot lists and what do I want and stuff like that. So that's interesting. I mean, how does that differ from like writing something that you're like, I'm not going to direct it, I'm going to sell this? Like, how do you know I have to tell this story as both hats versus I'm just going to tell the story as a writer and sell it off? How do you know when that's appropriate? I guess if that makes sense.
It's funny. I every now and then, in fact, more than every now and then, frequently, I get an idea for what seems like a really commercial project. It's like, oh, this is just going to be a thriller, or this is going to be a horror movie, or this is going to be a comedy, or this is going to be one of those, you know, mainstream sort of movies that could star out of Kevin Hart or something, something like that. And I never wind up writing those. You know, I always instead fall in love with the genre bending, slightly off kilter, unexpected story that feels more like myself and the way my brain works and the type of movie that I like to see. And then I write that, and then there's almost no chance anybody but me is going to wind up making it for that reason. Although I will say, I do have a script that uh, I'm very passionate about. I actually wrote it before the Big Bend. It's called Daisy, Arkansas, and I was in the process of getting that financed, and there was interest, and they wanted to bring it to another director, um, and they had somebody in mind, and I wasn't ready, and I said no. And at that time, I had a star attached to it, and I thought, well, with this star, I'm going to be able to get this made with myself as the director. It was a somewhat bigger budget than the Big Bend ultimately was, um, and it didn't happen. And I look back on it, and I I wonder, should I have said okay and let that go, and what would it have felt like? I think there's other scripts that I would happily let go now and let somebody else direct. Daisy, Arkansas, I am still sort of have my claws dug into it, and I'm not sure I could part with it.
But this is an interesting topic. I kind of want to follow through on this because you are so entrenched with your material. You just said yourself you like to write things that are kind of off the beaten path and a little bit avant-garde. So the difference between writing to market versus writing something that you would want to see, I mean, do you feel like a difference when you're writing those types of projects? Like maybe you feel more of a passion for one or something just comes together easier. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, that I guess that's what I mean is I sometimes set out with the thought of writing something to the market, and then I realize I can only write things I want to see. I think if I had an assignment and I knew it needed to get done, and somebody was writing a check, I could write a very straightforward commercial film. But I just am too interested in the gray areas, and I'm too interested in the nuance, and I'm too interested in blending genres and surprising people with an unexpected turn to write something that fits neatly into what you'd consider a highly marketable film. But that
Totally.
I'm
said,
kind of
people do
jealous
make
there.
those movies. I don't mean to suggest that nobody ever makes them. Alexander Payne gets to make them, and Spike Jonze gets to make them, and Charlie Kaufman makes them, and you know, a lot of European filmmakers make them. But I think they all, for the most part, tend to be writer directors who
Yeah,
have to kind of see the vision all the way through.
makes sense.
Yeah, I was kind of jealous when you were talking about that because I'm kind of the opposite. I'm the commercial guy. I'm like, this would be a great movie. Everyone will go see this, and and I'm also very plot focused and action, and you seem much more like you said. You find a really great setting, and then you start to see scenes in it. So there's a lot more quiet, introspective moments in the film. Sometimes, like I write things that are like this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this, and my characters are along for the ride. you have something happen, and then you have your characters all really, really dwelling on it and reflecting on it.
Yeah, although I like the movie to move. I
Mm-hmm.
like a movie where things happen, and uh, the reviews that we've gotten so far of the Big Bend, from the festival run, have been very, very positive. But a term that keeps coming up is overstuffed,
Hmm.
and it's four adult characters and four children.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really five adult characters, I guess, and they all have things going on that interweave, and there are setups and payoffs, and it is a lot to bite off. So I don't think it's a quiet, introspective film. The
No, I
characters
said
are
there are
are
moments that
reflective.
are quiet. There are
Yeah,
moments that are quiet and introspective.
yeah, for sure.
You let people kind of really soak in the feelings that these people are going through.
That's
So
true. Yeah, that's
you're not
true. And
rushing them through, but the movie still has action and excitement to it.
yeah, yeah, I think that's a fair observation. But it's interesting that the criticism I've gotten is that there's too much in it,
Hmm.
and I don't know. It's funny because
I thought it was well balanced. Actually, I thought it
thank
was
you.
very well balanced, and it rives waves of emotion and action. They're kind of woven together nicely. I was going to
That's
say
great
that
to hear.
the one thing about it is that it seems like there's a lot of symbolism in the film. Can you talk about that a little bit? There's the cave, the water, the children, the desert, the lights. Am I just reading stuff into those, or did you make conscious decisions
No,
about those?
no, absolutely. It's these are the things that were really there on this trip, and the things that I wanted to capture. Um, the the Marfa lights, for example, are a real phenomenon. If you go to West Texas, you can see them. They don't look exactly like the way we created them. We exaggerated them just a bit, but it's a real thing, and it's a bizarre, magical, inexplicable thing that when you're down there in that place, it makes you realize, wow, anything could happen out here. And you are so far away from the ordinary world, and your cell phone doesn't work, and you can drive 100 miles in any direction without seeing another person, perhaps. um, and that elevates everything. That makes everything that happens just a little trippier. It's not like just being in the desert is not unlike being on drugs, where you're really just wondering, is this thing I'm seeing really the way I think I'm seeing it? For
I've heard
example,
about
without
those. I've heard about those trips to the desert with the mushrooms
yeah,
and things.
yeah. Well, without spoiling it, the toad, which factors uh, significantly in the film, that happened exactly as it appears in the movie, and and it's really strange, and it was something that happened with my daughter and this toad, and it's just a weird thing, and I had to put it in the movie. And I think if you see the movie now, that's the kind of thing that somebody's going to say, well, that looks like symbolism, that doesn't look like reality. But that was the reality. It actually happened. um, there is a lot of interaction between the characters and nature, different animals, horses and snakes and the toads and other things. And you feel that very strongly when you're in the desert. It's incredibly stuffed with life down there, but the life is largely invisible until maybe you catch something in your headlights of your car, and it's spooky. It's really spooky.
As a writer who's actually gotten their films made, a lot of us write films and never get them made, or we sell them to someone else and they get them made. What's your advice to writers about making an independent film? Because I don't know what your budget was on this, but it seems like you did it pretty reasonably budget wise. It didn't look like an expensive movie, although it looked really, really good.
Well, a lot of our production value came from being out in this incredibly dramatic place. Um, However, being out there does cost money. It was not as easy as we maybe imagined it would be when we were just hanging out down there on vacation, dreaming up the movie. Um, the advice is really hard because we are in a very, very difficult time for American independent movies. I mean, I was in school um, at the peak of of American indie films, when if you just had a vision for something that was different and you could get it in the can, somebody was going to be interested, and it didn't matter if you had stars and there was just a desire for that. And I think that's largely been eclipsed by probably premium television is a big part of it. That now good TV is telling a lot of the stories that indie film used to tell. Um, but I don't know what there is to do besides just try to make the movie. Like if you're hoping somebody's going to give you $2 million to make a low budget feature film, you got to start by doing something for $20,000, and getting it out there, or perhaps making a really killer short film that you already have a plan for its expansion to a feature. Not a proof of concept exactly, but a standalone short film that you might be able to break out with. And somebody's like, what's the feature version of this? I mean, that's how, uh, let's say Whiplash got made, right? That started as a Sundance short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That still seems to be a great approach if you are not, you know, already in a world where you can easily get the attention of financiers. You don't have access to money, or you don't have access to stars. If there's an upside to the current sad state of American cinema, not cinema, American indie cinema, it's that movie stars are also hungry for good parts. And if you
Yeah.
can, get a script together and scrape together, uh, contingent financing for something that, for $2 or $3 million, you can actually get a movie star to do a $2 or $3 million movie now, which would have been unthinkable 20 years ago, because they are only, there's television and there's franchise movies, and there's not much in between anymore. That middle class of great 20 to $50 million budgeted movies has almost entirely gone away. We could count on our fingers the number of American filmmakers who get to continue working in that realm, and everybody else is making movies $2 to $5 million. And so there's some optimism there, which is that you can get great talent. Um, but it is also, it's a tough time. It's a really tough time for the format of standalone feature films that are more challenging or more unusual, and not backed by star power.
It's interesting you say the middle class of movies. I've never heard it termed like that, but it's kind of reflecting everything else in America. So, yeah, that's
That's
actually
right.
really
That's
sad, you know.
I
But I was
think
going
that's
to
quite
say
accurate.
too. I was going to say you're not in a I mean Atlanta's probably your closest market, but since you are in the indie scene, do you find it easier to be outside of one of the big industry centers to do your movies? Does it help? Does it hurt? Pros, cons?
It's hard to know because I can't A and B test my life. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
It'd be really interesting to say, what is the version of me that still lives in Los Angeles? How's he doing? And how's the version of me that moved to Savannah a few years ago doing by comparison? Um, I don't know. I came here to teach, and I've really enjoyed teaching. I've really enjoyed connecting with the generation behind me that's coming up interested in making movies. It's great to have colleagues, and SCAD is very industry connected, and there's great people coming through all the time. And so in a certain way, I feel like I'm still making fresh connections in the film industry, despite not being in Los Angeles anymore. On the other hand, I have spent the entire time I've been here making the Big Bend, taking the Big Bend to film festivals, and now getting it released. And that movie was largely developed and at least partially financed before I came. And so the next thing is going to be, oh, what's it like to get the next movie off the ground from scratch from here? And that I think is yet to be seen. But the
Yeah.
weird thing about COVID is that it did scatter us all. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I to this day I feel like, you talk to an agent or a manager, and they are very likely not to be in LA. I think a lot of people are working from home and continue to work from home, and their meetings are virtual meetings. And I don't know if the inability to you know show up in Century City for a meeting at CAA or whatever is actually the disadvantage that it was 5 years ago anymore.
Yeah.
But like I spent 9 years in LA, and while I didn't get any, I made some short films and stuff while I was there. The most important thing was I made connections. I learned the industry, and I made connections so that when I did leave, I still had, footholds there. I know I can go back if I need to. I've got connections. I've got, uh, I understand how it works. So I think that that's important for filmmakers and maybe not have to be in LA, but being able to have access to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I, it was the same for me. I was there for 7 years before coming here, and I established a lot of relationships that continue. And I certainly, now that I'm advising students on what to do at, age 21 as they get out of undergrad, I am still telling them, depending on what their interests are, it's LA or New York, probably LA. You need to go do that. You need to put in that time. You need to do that legwork. As you get, sort of to mid-career, then maybe it matters less. Then maybe it's about the script and about the project.
Yeah. The resources are available now to do more remotely, but I still,
Absolutely.
yeah, but having the experience and the education that provides you is pretty invaluable too.
I just have to ask, you would advise LA or New York, but not Atlanta, which would be technically closer?
I advise Atlanta for people who want to work on crews. Like if you're
Oh.
a grit, if you're an assistant camera, by all means go to Atlanta. But if you're a writer or a director at the beginning of your career, the creative decisions are still being made in
Yeah.
Los Angeles and maybe a
Oh,
little bit New
interesting.
York. With the exception of, yeah, I guess Tyler Perry. He's fully
The
in
only
he's
one
fully
keeping
in
Atlanta
Atlanta.
in
But
business.
somehow I suspect that before you ever get to meet Tyler Perry, you've got to meet a bunch of producers who are all in LA. I don't know
For
for sure.
sure. For sure. Oh, that's
Cool.
interesting.
So if people want to learn more about you, maybe where you're teaching and your movie, where can they find you online?
Yeah. So the handle for our film is at the Big Bend Movie, and that's uh, Instagram and Facebook. So all the information about the theatrical release, which starts this Friday in New York, and then we'll be opening in LA and Texas, and more widely later in May. Um, all that information will always be on the Facebook page and the Instagram. And my own Instagram is Wagnerific. So my last name plus IFIC. People can follow me there. That's more of a personal thing. Um, but yeah, we're out there.
Cool. So yeah, definitely check out the Big Bend wherever you can find it. Going to be, I think it's going to be in some of your indie theaters, some of those cool venues. But good luck with the movie, and we hope to have you back in the future for other stuff.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you both.
Thanks for listening. Do follow us online at wgtherapy.com on X and Instagram, and visit writersgrouptherapy.com for more episodes. Until then, we'll see you next time.